At 4:12 on the morning of November 6, 2025, a thick fog blanketed the region of Bryansk, Russia. A burst of Mach 1.7 fire from shoulder-launched 9K-38 Igla interceptors screamed off the ground, locking onto their targets just a few hundred meters away. 10 Ukrainian kamikaze UAVs. They vanished instantly. In the command cab, the Chinese officer in charge cheered as if he just won the Powerball jackpot. But what he didn't know was that the entire convoy was under full surveillance by a KH-11 satellite, part of the U.S. intelligence support program for Ukraine. A clear piece of evidence exposing the deepening alliance between Beijing and Moscow, this convoy was heading toward the Kursk military-industrial complex, a facility that produces 1,500 FPV drones, 600 missiles of various types, and 1.5 million units of ammunition per day. En route R198, a 24-vehicle Chinese convoy was moving silently southwest, its destination just 40 miles from the Ukrainian border. But this time, they weren't invisible. At a position 50 miles from the Kursk facility, a Ukrainian Shark reconnaissance UAV had been holding station for over an hour. The USG-231 infrared camera suite aboard the drone captured the entire convoy from an altitude of 5,500 feet. No headlights, no radio emissions. The vehicles moved like a shadow army. An MTLB led the way, followed closely by $50 million worth of aid in a tight, silent column. A fleet of Ural trucks carried drone manufacturing supplies and infantry weapon components. A line of kamikaze vehicles transported missile parts, artillery shells, and RDX military-grade explosives. The tail consisted of a command and electronic warfare vehicle, along with two large BTR-80 escort vehicles. All headed forward, their commanders calm inside the cabins. From above, the whole thing looked like a steel serpent slithering through the night, perfectly evading Ukraine's aerial or radar surveillance. At a forward operating base 93 miles away, the control screen displayed 10 attack UAVs destroyed. The mission commander knew exactly what he was doing. The first wave of UAVs had been a decoy strike to bait out defenses, and now the strike team from the 23rd Brigade had what it needed: most clarity. The convoy was only protected by manpads, rifles, and a few machine guns mounted on the leading MTLB. The defense layout was now exposed. Phase 2 of the operation was greenlit. 150 kamikaze drones had already crossed the border and were now just 2.5 miles from the locked target. Each carried a 6.6-pound explosive payload, flying at low altitude hidden by terrain, invisible to early warning radars not configured to scan below 32 feet. Ukraine's military intelligence was crystal clear. This convoy carried a massive shipment that could shift the battlefield in Russia's favor. In other words, it was the surprise gift Putin wanted more than anything. If Ukraine failed to intercept, entire border towns could fall. That's why a high-priority meeting lasting half a day had been held at the 23rd Brigade's HQ 72 hours earlier. After 48 hours of tracking, they identified the weakest point in the convoy's entire cross-border journey, the intersection at kilometer 192. This area had blind spots in Russia's ground radar coverage, no fixed guard posts, and the convoy was expected to pass through within a 30-minute window. If hit here, all the UAV parts, weapons, and explosives would erupt in flames in the forest, and the Vector 21 factory would be paralyzed for 3 to 4 weeks. At exactly 4:20, the convoy moved just as Ukraine had anticipated. Tight formation, steady speed, approaching a narrow bend cutting through the forest. This was the final stretch before entering Kursk's air defense zone. At the 23rd Brigade UAV Operations Command Post, attack mode was engaged. Encrypted signals were transmitted to each drone hiding nearby, signaling the moment the predators would lunge from cover. The first hums pierced the fog, familiar sounds, the high-pitched whine of electric motors. Ukraine's drone swarm began Phase 1 of the strike. 70 of them split into 4 strike teams, each assigned a task: neutralize defenses, destroy the command vehicle, and crush the lead escort. They screamed in at just 23 feet, flying so fast the infrared cameras only caught streaks of light like flying bullets. The entire vanguard of the Russia-China convoy was now within kill radius. The lead MTLB armored vehicle took the brunt of the first strike. One drone smashed into its hull, another hit the engine cover, and a third pierced the right side. The double explosion blew through the thin steel plating, flipping the 10-ton vehicle onto its side as flames lit up the forest like a signal flare. Other UAVs followed up immediately, diving into machine gun nests and manpads crews stationed on the mid-convoy trucks. Each carried RDX warheads, detonating with concussive force that tore through metal. A Chinese team preparing to launch an Igla never had a chance. White flash, shockwave, and 3 bodies hurled from the flatbed. Farther back, panic rippled. Escort troops opened fire into the mist with AK-12 and QBZ-191S, bursts blindly aimed at the fast-approaching dots, each coming in at nearly 90 miles per hour. Low above the trees, tracer rounds crisscrossed, a feeble fence of light in a storm of steel. But small infantry rounds meant nothing to targets the size of a clenched fist, darting and weaving at low altitudes. Some troops tried activating manpads, but their passive warning systems were jammed by smoke and flames from burning vehicles. One 9K-38 Igla missile managed to launch, but its heat seeker locked onto the flaming MTLB wreck, veering into the blaze and detonating, a cruel irony. In the first 90 seconds, the first 4 vehicles were completely neutralized. Thick black smoke and burning fuel rose skyward, forming a natural curtain that cloaked the road segment ahead. In the middle of the convoy, panicked drivers slammed on the brakes, causing the Ural trucks carrying UAV components and the kamikaze trucks loaded with explosives to crash into each other, piling up into a chaotic heap. Escort troops leapt from their vehicles, flattened themselves on the roadside, and fired wildly into the sky. A few UAVs were hit and exploded prematurely, but the rest pierced through the defensive line like spears. The only manpad system still operational belonged to the third team. A Chinese soldier hastily locked onto a target and fired the last Igla missile in the battery. The missile streaked through the white smoke and struck a UAV mid-turn, creating a small fireball. Cheers erupted over the radio, but the joy lasted less than 10 seconds. 3 other UAVs approached from the opposite direction, striking their escort vehicle with pinpoint accuracy. The explosion was so powerful, it tore the armored frame in half, hurling the wreckage into the ditch. It is estimated that more than half of the UAVs in the first wave struck their targets. The manpad's positions were destroyed, and the entire defensive firepower was neutralized. Only a few UAVs were shot down. The rest, over 50 units, turned the Bryansk forest into a miniature hellscape of burning vehicles, secondary explosions, and screams echoing through the cold mechanical whine of autonomous machines continuing their search for surviving targets. From a command base over 100 kilometers away, Ukrainian officers monitored the entire battle through cameras on the Shark reconnaissance UAVs. The screen clearly displayed each explosion and the expanding thermal plumes. The opening phase was complete. The front of the convoy had been annihilated, and the enemy's first-line defense net had collapsed completely. Now, the second swarm of UAVs, the remaining 80 units, prepared to emerge, carrying one simple order finish what was left on Route R-198. At 4:25, in an atmosphere thick with fuel smoke, explosive dust, and the sound of shattering metal, the second wave of kamikaze UAVs began the extermination phase. The remaining 80 kamikaze UAVs plunged into the center and rear of the convoy, targeting the kamikaze trucks carrying engineering explosives, the Ural trucks hauling weapons components, and the tarp-covered trucks loaded with rocket assembly parts, launch tubes, spring-loaded gun components, and artillery fuse systems. They divided into 3 assault groups, flying at ultra-low altitudes, just 10 feet above ground, at speeds of 95 miles per hour, generating fast fluctuating infrared waves that prevented enemy sensors from locking on. The first UAV team dove straight into a heavy kamikaze truck marked with a hazardous materials symbol and sealed in red. The warhead pierced the vehicle's shell, and in an instant, a fireball erupted, consuming the surrounding cluster of trucks. The explosives inside triggered a chain reaction, creating a secondary blast so strong it warped the R-198 road surface and shattered the windows of vehicles over 260 feet away. The rest of the UAVs descended like wild predators smelling blood. each one slamming into truck rears, tires, driver cabins, where Russian and Chinese soldiers were desperately trying to escape. Some managed to jump into roadside ditches, but the UAVs didn't need visual confirmation, only the heat signature of a living body or the slightest movement. They locked on, using image analysis algorithms, adjusted their attack vectors, and struck like missiles. One UAV hit a container truck carrying the electromagnetic core of the domestic navigation radar system. The explosion tore through the steel casing, turning the entire electronic payload into a charred pile of copper. Another truck carrying lithium-ion batteries for UAVs was struck. The battery pack erupted into a white-blue firestorm, releasing toxic smoke. The entire convoy, nearly 1,300 feet long, was turned into a charred graveyard of metal. 23 out of 24 vehicles were completely destroyed. The last one lay overturned in a ditch, its steel frame scorched and disfigured. Fires from the fuel and explosive compartments continued to burn, periodically detonating with thunderous booms. Black smoke billowed over 100 feet high, visible from dozens of kilometers away. When the dust settled, Route R198, once a critical logistical artery linking Voronezh to Kursk, was nothing more than a scarred blackened strip. The entire 24-vehicle convoy had been wiped out. The charred remains of KAMAZ, Ural, and MTLB frames mixed with hundreds of thousands of scorched components, wires, lithium batteries, rocket casings, and incomplete artillery shells. Even the Chinese characters on the cargo crates were clearly visible in the infrared feed from the Shark UAV circling overhead. That scene was irrefutable evidence the clandestine supply line from Beijing to Moscow not only existed, it had now been exposed. The message from Kyiv was unmistakable. There is no safe zone for Russia, not even within its own borders. If military support from China continues, the next convoy won't just be tracked, it will be torn apart in the night. The Russian military-industrial brigade in Kursk was forced to seal off the area and launch an investigation. But they couldn't hide the glaring breach their logistics system had been tracked from the border. 3 days after the strike, Russian units on the Belgorod-Sumy front began reporting shortages of FPV drones and 122mm artillery shells. The frequency of Russian kamikaze drone strikes in Donetsk was noticeably reduced. Meanwhile, Ukraine exploited the gap to the fullest. Counter-battery fire became more accurate, ground assault teams operated more safely, and Ukrainian UAVs faced virtually no aerial opposition in forward airspace.